So they copied the model of the research seminars of philologists and historians. They brought it into mathematics. And you have the Jacobi and Neumann in Königsberg. And he is explaining it this way. If we now ask about the spirit that characterizes this whole development, we can in short say it is a scientifically oriented neo-humanism, whose aim is the inexorably strict cultivation of pure science. And in search of that aim, establishes a specialized higher culture with a splendor never seen before, through a concentrated effort of all its powers. Well, this is very high-powered way of explaining your ideas, but it's actually connecting with several of the topics I mentioned, like, for instance, this idea of a specialized higher culture. This is this idea of living the sciences in a relatively closed and very concentrated spirit, which was still the case in Göttingen with Klein, of course. Scientifically oriented neo-humanism, well, the orientation of neo-humanism, but in this case, put to the service of this model science, which is mathematics, developed in the spirit of pure mathematics. But, okay, so I hope it is more or less clear with this quotation. Now, another point I would like to make is that one has to keep in mind that this is happening in an international context. And of course, international relations were quite important, and there is a strong development of that too. The international context was strongly mixed. It was not the pure mathematics context. And this is perhaps important to understand how things develop. Also, the fact that the course of studies for somebody who would end up being a mathematician in Germany, it was perfectly free, and typically it was never of the kind that Arnold was talking about. The people would be taking courses in mathematics and then in physics and perhaps also in philosophy. That is a typical combination for many important German mathematicians. So I point to these things because, well, of course, I mean, people in Germany were very well aware of developments in France and in Britain. They were very well aware of mathematical physics and the importance of mathematical physics. And they were constantly being exposed also to those types of developments. Let me see. Yeah, perhaps the second part I wanted to say some things about the Göttingen model and Klein, but this is something that you all probably know very well, so I can be very brief, I guess. By 1900, of course, the triumph of pure mathematics seems to be clear, right? It's triumphant, it is being spread very widely around the world, and as, of course, if you want a joke, the famous one that Credit's journal was the journal for pure unapplied mathematics. Not applied, unapplied mathematics. Unangewandte. Okay.
Abgewandt.
Sorry?
There's a great word abgewandt in mathematics.
I think they use unangewandte.
Yeah, but
Unangewandte. Yeah. Now, of course, this is in conflict with Klein's orientation to some extent, because well, he's going to be the great institute builder and the great discipline builder, but he's a geometer in the time of strict arithmetization and abstract logic. So he's somebody who will insist on the role of intuition instead of just this purity of Weierstrass. And he's somebody who will admire, for instance, the state of matters in Britain, and so he will be interested in keeping alive connections that are being lost between mathematicians and engineers, or between mathematics and physics. So he puts all of his powerful abilities. He's probably the most powerful mathematician you can see in the 19th and early 20th century, all over. I guess, I don't know if you agree, but he's a likely candidate for being that. He had very strong connections with the ministry, and he was very good at well, many things in society, in his connections with industrialists and all that. So he uses all of those, and he's very active, very strong personality. So for hirings, they are very successful in hiring several different people in a way that was basically unheard of for mathematics in German universities. There is the development of relations with industry. So he manages to create to have a group of industrialists supporting the enterprise. There is this famous creation of institutes for applied mathematics in the early 20th century, and all of that. And the famous encyclopedia of the mathematical sciences is also put to the service of reorienting the image of the discipline. So it's much of this activity is a good sign of how strongly things have gone in the direction of pure mathematics, that he's so worried about regaining balance, going back to a more balanced state of affairs, for which he will often use the names of Riemann and Gauss, which is very handy, of course. They were important getting in figures, and he can make a point that in their work and in their career you find the right balance between several different things. They are not mere mathematicians, they are devoting themselves to natural science and several other things. So it's interesting that also Hilbert's work. Hilbert is an interesting character in this context because important parts of what he's doing, you can look at them as being serving the same aims as Klein was trying to promote. For one thing, the idea of pure mathematics is going to be redefined to include again geometry. Or if you want to put it another way, geometry is going to be rebuilt in such a way that it fits into some image of pure mathematics, and of course the Grundlagen of Hilbert are crucial in this context. Arithmetization, this is to be rethought in trying to readjust it and again to make room for things that were, at least the way they see it, the way time will think about these things, there is a clear contrast between their views and the views in Berlin. What the Berlin school, which had been so powerful in the 60s, 70s, 80s, had been promoting, and so you had to go back. Actually, you probably know that the first person who talks about arithmetization is precisely Klein. I mean, the idea was there, the name was not. The name was coined by Klein in an attempt to reorient it. Right? And you find it also in the Grundlagen of Hilbert, saying that one of his aims is to arithmetize geometry. So there are ideas about how to bring geometry back into this. And of course, re-establishing links between mathematics, the sciences, and engineering. This is very well known, but and you have all kinds of science. Minkowski and Hilbert will be doing work on physics in the early 20th century at Göttingen, and there is the famous, this is very well known by people who know about the history of quantum theory, how there was this nice combination of the impulse coming from mathematicians interested in physics and the new physics, and how that combined into developments such as the ones promoted by Hermann Weyl, one of their students, or Max Born, one of their students, etc. Okay, I think I had several. Well, one interesting idea they had, one idea in which Klein and Hilbert will insist a lot, is the ideal of unified science, mathematics as unified. And this is the way they make it play a role goes against tendencies to disgregate things, which is the way they perceive, for instance, the Berlin orientation of arithmetization understood in the way of Weierstrass. Well, yeah. I was giving here some examples of how they use the name of Riemann or Gauss for this, but it's not very important. Now, well, 5 more minutes maybe. So perhaps instead, I had written down, this is more like an afterthought, to discuss a little bit the situation in the age of modernist extremes. This is very nice, but it's actually something that is phrase that is being used by cultural historians, and I think it is quite right. I mean, the 20s and 30s were an age of extremes, and you can see signs of that in many different places. There was this very strong cultural drive for the new everywhere. Things have to be new. And it's not just new math and new physics, it's a new man. The political movements in that period will be playing very strongly with the idea of the new man we have to, and well, so in literature, in music, in many areas you find this, and of course Jeremy has written a wonderful book on this topic, so you find a lot of important information there. But perhaps instead of discussing this, well, more in detail, I may summarize simply by saying a few things about the contrast between the situation that Arnold was talking about, so this overemphasis on pure mathematics in the 20th century. Many people would argue that, I guess, in recent years. There are many initiatives in mathematics departments in Europe, at least, in the places and the few places I know, hiring applied mathematicians, developing things in a different way. So it seems to be the case that the old, meaning the 20th century image of pure mathematics is being replaced by something else. Now, simply to offer a couple of reflections on what was different between the purism of the 19th century and the purism of the 20th century. There are some things, at least, that come to my mind. In the 19th century, there is a very strong educational ideal, which is very integrated. You may like it more or less, but it's a very integrated kind of educational ideal. And this contrasts very strongly with the very strong specialization in scientists in the middle of the 20th century. So this makes, I think, for a totally different function, probably, of this notion of purity. From one framework to the other, it will be doing different things. So the liberal educational kind of ideal of the 19th century contrasts with the very utilitarian, specialized orientation in the 20th century. And this makes, for instance, if people talk like Gauss about some branch of mathematics that they want to think about as an autonomous thing, it's different to do that in the kind of integrated setting early on, or in the kind of disgregated setting later on in the 20th century. Also, another very strong difference is that mathematics was taken to be the model science still in the 19th century, while in the 20th century we have this insistence from many coming from many different places, including philosophers, of course, that mathematics is not a science. Read Wittgenstein, or read whatever you want. I mean, it's tautologies or insistence on this notion of the formal sciences as totally different from the empirical sciences, and stuff like that is when you look at it from a very broad kind of, if you want, cultural, historical, or social historical perspective, it's doing some, it's orienting things in quite a different way from what was the case when mathematics was regarded as the queen of the sciences. This is what they used to say in the 19th. And also, this is also related with an idea that I always like to think about, because I think it's a very interesting one, a very intriguing one. The part of the image of mathematics in the 20th century is this image of a self-contained, fully self-contained discipline, which is quite surprising to me, at least as a philosopher. I think to understand how that may come about is a very, so this whole idea that and this is totally different from the 19th century. I can offer you quotations, but the typical idea in the 19th century is that the foundations of mathematics belong somewhere else, of course. If you really want to understand the foundations of the calculus to the very end of it, you have the metaphysics of the calculus. That's a metaphysical ontological issue. It's not an issue about mathematical logic or the mathematical foundations of mathematics, as it will become the case in the 20th century. So this is also somehow linked to that, but that's a different story, and it goes in a different direction. So I think I will leave it here. Sorry if I couldn't cover more.